Breaking the code.
The war in Yemen has left over 10,000 people dead and countless wounded. The conflict has its roots in the failed political transition when the country's long-time authoritarian president Ali Abdullah Saleh handed over power to Abdurrabba Mansour Hadi, his deputy, in November 2011. The Houthi rebels, which had battled the Yemeni government on and off since 2004, then entered the capital Sana'a in September 2014. Buoyed by the support of the country's Shia minority, as well as many Sunnis, the Houthis attempted to take control of the entire country, forcing Hadi to flee. This has led to an air campaign by Saudi Arabia and other mostly Sunni Arab states aimed at restoring Hadi's government. The coalition is receiving logistical, intelligence and military support from the United States, the United Kingdom and France. The conflict and a blockade imposed by the coalition have triggered a humanitarian disaster, leaving 80% of the population in need of aid. But Yemen, being the poorest country in the Arab world, already faced a series of problems before the war began.
Breaking the code.
Shireen El-Tarabulsi McCarthy is a research fellow with the Humanitarian Policy Group at the Overseas Development Institute. She expanded on the dire humanitarian situation facing the country.
Yemen, before 2015 and before the Saudi-led coalition's military engagement there and the Houthi rebellion, before all of that, Yemen was already a very poor country, and the vast majority of its food was imported. At least 90% of it was imported from outside. It relied very, very heavily on Saudi Arabia also for trade and for its economy. So Yemen, before everything had started and before even 2011, 2012 and the Arab uprisings, it was already a very poor country. But at least there was some form of cohesion between the two regions, the north and the south, and some form of stability.
In terms of the war itself, what have we seen? There's talk of a famine. Obviously, we know there's a blockade on Sana'a and the surrounding areas. How big an impact has that had on the humanitarian situation in the country?
So the humanitarian situation today is quite critical. More than 18 million people, 18.8 million people are in need of some form of humanitarian assistance, and this is according to the latest figures that have been released by OCHA. And even back in 2015, the UN declared the crisis in Yemen as a level 3, the highest level of humanitarian crisis. So you've got more than 80% of the population in need of humanitarian assistance. This situation is exacerbated by the economic blockade and restrictions on imports, because as I mentioned to you, Yemen relies on food imports and medical imports. So the restrictions have rendered the situation a lot more dire and a lot more critical. There are also restrictions on movement of people and goods and resources, and a restriction on transferring and moving cash. There's a problem with liquidity, so even traders who would be interested in bringing in imports into the country and distributing and having access to various regions of Yemen, they are unable to transfer cash, and lenders have also become very reluctant to offer them letters of credit because of the situation, because of the problem with liquidity, but also because with the crisis related to the central bank and its move from Sana'a to Aden. So whichever way you look at it, the humanitarian crisis in Yemen is really very critical, and it is also commensurate with the crisis in Syria, if not more, because Yemenis don't have any outlets and they've not made it into the media in the same way that the Syrian crisis has.
Now, while there have been casualties on both sides, the Saudi-led coalition has been responsible for the majority of deaths in Yemen. However, the United Nations Human Rights Council declined to set up an independent inquiry into abuses in the country. And with a dangerous situation on the ground, there are very few journalists stationed there. This means it has been difficult to get clear information about what exactly is going on. But one journalist who has been reporting from the capital Sana'a is Hussein Abu Khalti. When I managed to speak to him, he told me the situation is becoming untenable.
The humanitarian situation every day is getting worse. and one of the main causes is the Saudi blockade, and as well the rise in prices for food, and especially as well the rise in the prices of medicine and food for children. Those are the main factors that affect the Yemeni people directly, and what as well added the salt into injury is that the so-called Hadi government, supported by the Saudi and the United States, has moved the central bank from Sana'a toward Aden. And since that move 3 months ago, they hasn't paid any of the salaries for all public sector. So those people in cities who depend 100% on the salary are not paid. And there are many people as well from outside Sana'a and from Sa'ada and Hajja region and areas that are being badly hit by the Saudi strike have moved and run away from the war into Sana'a. So the Sana'a now is kind of become a hub for displaced people in Yemen. And this as well added a heavy load on the public sector, and as well a heavy load on what you call it, the hospital, the clinic in Sana'a, and as well the need of medicine. And with the Saudi blockade on the Sana'a airport, this affects directly people with diseases like cancer patients. Those people cannot get any treatment outside Yemen. Either they cannot afford it, or because of the blockade or the closure of Sana'a airport.
And obviously the United Kingdom is supporting Saudi Arabia in its campaign in Yemen. What are the opinions of people in Sana'a of the role that Britain is playing in the war?
They see the involvement of Britain, if not the same as the involvement of Saudi and the USA. They see it actually more. And as we say in Yemen, that the UK involvement in Yemen is dirtier and more dirty, as I don't know how I can explain it. It's more dirty than the US involvement, because they do the same thing that the US doing. They sell weapons to the Saudi, but the US, they are kind of 100% with the Saudi, and they will go up and they will say, we are with the Saudi, we are in the coalition. It's just like cowboy. They're not afraid of anybody. They defend the Saudi openly. But what Britain always doing is like when they blocked an international investigation in Geneva twice. They have supported the Saudi to head the human rights panel, and they have supported, this was during the war in Yemen, they have supported as well the Saudi to be a member of the Human Rights Council, we call it, in New York. They see that Britain, as a democratic country, they actually doing exactly what the United States are doing, but they doing it they try to do it in secret. They deferred and didn't do any investigation about cluster bombs used in Yemen, but at the end, the Saudi have admitted. And this is the thing that really makes people angry at Britain, because Yemeni here think that the United States is the reason of the collapse of the Middle East, but in Yemen, they found out Britain is actually behind as well all of that. And Britain is the one, that support the Saudi, as they say, under the table. So this is when you don't know who is your enemy, this is the danger. And that's what the Yemenis feel about the United Kingdom.
Breaking the code.
So why does Britain have such tight ties with Saudi Arabia? Well, there are extensive business and investment links between the two countries. In bilateral terms, it's a relationship that is valued by both sides. Saudi Arabia is Britain's primary trading partner in the Middle East, with 200 joint ventures being worth at $17.5 billion. And some 30,000 British nationals live and work in the kingdom. Now, Saudi Arabia is also Britain's largest arms market by far, receiving almost $4 billion from sales between May 2010 and March 2015. Now, add that to the fact that Saudi Arabia has the world's second largest oil reserves, and you can maybe get a picture of why it occupies such an important strategic position for the United Kingdom and indeed for other Western countries. But according to the renowned British journalist and editor of The Spectator magazine, Peter Oborne, there are also historic ties which influence the relationship. He explained these to me when I caught up with him.
Well, Britain actually helped to create Saudi Arabia with the alliance of the Saud family in the 1930s, when the Russian spy Kim Philby's father, Harry St. John Philby, probably did even more damage in some ways, you might think, to British interests than his son, because he was the chief advisor to the founder of Saudi Arabia. And so Britain's relationship goes back a very long way indeed.
Is that still crucial to Britain's support for Saudi Arabia's action in Yemen? Is it too economically integral to the relationship that it can't afford to come down too heavy on it?
It's mainly speculation, this, because a lot of the details clear, but it's obvious that Britain exports a lot of arms to Saudi Arabia, and it's very important in that respect. And of course, Saudi is a huge oil producer, so it's important to the economies of the West, and generally speaking, it's a long-standing ally, and there is a feeling, which I think is an honourable feeling, that Britain should be loyal to an ally. And so those are the three reasons why Britain has a friendship with Saudi. I think personally that it distorted British foreign policy in the region, and indeed Western foreign policy in the region. I think Saudi has become, in its foreign policy, extremely sectarian, and I think we should have a balanced approach, i.e., Iran is another great power in that region, and I think we should be much more balanced between Saudi and Iran than what we do at the moment, which is to support publicly whatever Saudi does.
In terms of conflicts in the Middle East, the war in Syria has dominated the news agenda for a number of years now. Quite rightly, some might say because of the humanitarian catastrophe that has taken place there. Why is it, do you think, that Yemen has received a lot less coverage than the war in Syria and elsewhere?
The obvious reason why there has been less news coverage in the Yemen is because it is very much a closed place. Millions of refugees have escaped from Syria. Many of them have come to Europe or the boundaries of Europe. Yemen, it's very hard to get away from. On one side you've got the Saudis and the desert, and the other side you've got the sea on the other side, very hard to cross. It's very hard to get out of. It doesn't pose a problem for the West. And there's a second reason. In Syria, the objective of Saudi Arabia has been to dismantle and destroy the Assad government. And I think that Britain's foreign policy has taken that on board. I think that's one of the reasons why the British, and indeed the United States and elsewhere, committed themselves to helping or getting rid of Assad. Whereas, of course, the objective of Saudi in Yemen is to support President Hadi and oppose the Houthis, who they see as rebels. So the Western noise is anti-Assad in Syria, but of course it's not noisy on behalf of the Yemeni people in the same way that it has been incredibly noisy on behalf of the Syrian people caught up in that terrible conflict there. And
there has been, perhaps quite slowly, but there has been some growing dissent within Britain in terms of its role in the war, in particular, like you mentioned earlier, the selling of arms. Now, Conservative MP Andrew Mitchell recently visited Yemen and has written about his experiences there and what he's seen there. Do you think there is evidence of growing dissent within British politics to the role that the UK is playing in perpetuating the conflict?
There's a small amount of reservations. There was a very fascinating parliamentary vote condemning the conflict a few months ago, where it was lost because the Blairites MPs, the old supporters and the centre-right of the party opposed Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, and that meant that there was no real vote in Parliament. I mean, well, there was a vote, but the motion was voted down. And there's a small number of Conservative MPs who are conscious of what is going on. I think that going on, I just think that there has been a cruel absence of care about what is going on, particularly given Britain's historic relationship with Yemen. I mean, I went there last year, and it was very clear that people loved Britain, and they valued the fact that we had historical associations in the region, and kept on asking you, why are you on the side of the people who are bombing us?
Well, as Peter Oborne mentioned there has been a break from the UK's policies from some politicians, such as former Cabinet Minister Andrew Mitchell MP. Mitchell has witnessed the reality on the ground and is the only British politician who has visited Yemen in the past 2 years. Upon his return, he said the UK government's policy of selling arms to the Saudi-led coalition, while at the same time providing millions of pounds in aid, was contradictory and inconsistent. And speaking to me earlier, he said the international community needs to turn its attention to Yemen, or else a humanitarian disaster is set to unfold. However, Mitchell did stop short of calling for a complete arms embargo on the country.
I basically saw a country that is not so much starving as being starved. Yemen is being blockaded by a coalition, which is causing enormous humanitarian problems, and I think there are about 7 million people now who are starving, and acute dangers of famine in Yemen. And it is a forgotten conflict because most of the airtime has focused on Syria, and the international community needs urgently to turn its attention to Yemen. Otherwise, a humanitarian disaster there is going to unfold, which is more or less entirely caused not by natural disaster, but by the actions that are being taken to blockade the country from land, sea and air.
Are you concerned that Britain may be playing some role in fueling this conflict due to the extensive arms sales to Saudi Arabia?
I think that the issue of arms sales is less relevant in answering that question, since the Saudis would get the arms anyway. So the issue is how those arms are used. But I am concerned that British policy is internally inconsistent, because on the one hand we are seeking to continue to help Yemen in the way that we have in the past in achieving its humanitarian objectives, but we are also part of a coalition which is blockading Yemen, and these two policy activities are contradictory of each other.
And how prevalent do you believe your opinion is? Obviously you are one of the few British MPs to have visited the region during the conflict. Is your opinion one that is also felt by other MPs, or do you believe that this is very much a minority opinion that's held?
I think that the points that I am making today in this interview would be widely held in the British Parliament, and also by the British government too. I think there is an acceptance that there is a confusion here, and an anxiety also that confusion should be addressed.
And do you believe, from what we know, indeed there obviously hasn't been a United Nations investigation into the conflict, do you believe there should be an investigation, and do you believe that investigation would prove that war crimes are being committed here?
I think that the purpose of an international investigation would be to answer that question, and I do think there is a problem in the Saudis investigating their own actions. That is not because I believe the Saudis would in any way falsify what they discovered, but because I think that investigating your own work, as it were, does not carry, or is in danger of not carrying, international credibility. And that is a serious issue and a serious problem in terms of answering to the satisfaction of the international community whether international law has in any way been breached.
Why is the relationship with Saudi Arabia so integral to British foreign policy?
Britain has a very close intelligence relationship and commercial relationship with Saudi Arabia. It's a relationship we value. Saudi are close friends of ours, but in respect of the Yemen, I very much fear that the policy which Saudi is pursuing is not going to be successful, and I do think it is part of the role of candid friends and close friends to be able to point these issues out.
You also mentioned before that you believe there is a danger that this could increase terrorism at home in Britain. Is that also a very much real fear?
Well, I think there's a danger that at the moment there's another generation of children who are not being educated and who may well be radicalized by what they're seeing going on around them. And that is something which potentially affects the wider region in Europe and indeed Britain as well. And it's another reason why, in my view, it's important that a ceasefire is achieved as rapidly as possible, that Saudi-Yemeni talks take place, and then the much more difficult struggle of achieving a deal inside Yemen, which is from the bottom up, which includes as many of the competing elements as possible, in particular the tribes and the governorates of Yemen. That's a very important aspect of all of this, and the sooner we get to a ceasefire and these negotiations taking place, the better.
Breaking the code.
So while Mitchell is calling for an immediate ceasefire, he does not believe the British arms sales are playing a serious role in fueling the conflict. Now, Britain has a long history of selling arms to the kingdom. The Al Yamama agreements of the 1980s were between the Thatcher government in the UK and the Saudi Arabian government, and they involved the sales of military equipment, especially Tornado and Hawk jets, supplied by what is now BAE Systems. Now, this agreement has been supplemented by a series of new agreements up until the present day, including the selling of 72 Eurofighter Typhoons and a £4.4 billion deal called the Salam Project, which means Peace Project. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Andrew Smith from the Campaign Against Arms Trade takes an opposite view to Mitchell. He believes that the billions of pounds worth of weapons that the UK sells to Saudi Arabia is crucial to the oil-rich kingdom's war effort, and he also argued that countries like Britain are giving Saudi Arabia not just military support, but also key political support.
For decades now, Saudi Arabia has been by far the largest buyer of UK weapons. This amounts to billions and billions of pounds. Since the bombing of Yemen began 2 years ago, the UK has licensed over £3 billion worth of arms, including the fighter jets which are flying over Yemen and the bombs which are being dropped from the sky. The impact it's having on people in Yemen is catastrophic. A humanitarian catastrophe has been unleashed on what is one of the poorest countries in the region. 10,000 people have been killed, vital infrastructure has been wiped out, and UK-made arms has been central to that. But it's not just the military support it gives to Saudi Arabia, it's also the political support and the message it sends out. The message it sends out is that the UK thinks this is a legitimate government to be doing business with. This is Saudi Arabia, a government with one of the worst human rights records in the world. This is a government that tortures journalists. This is a government that kills those who dissent against it. This is a government which commits atrocities every single day against its own people and is doing terrible things to people in Yemen. It's a government which for decades now has shown its total contempt for human rights and has been supported every step of the way by successive UK governments, both Labour and Conservative, and Coalition, everything in between.
What do you believe is the basis for Britain's very close relationship with Saudi Arabia? Is it purely economic?
I think the economics plays a part of it, but I think a large part of it will be about geopolitical politics. It will be about the UK trying to increase its influence in the region, regardless of the humanitarian consequences and regardless of the outcomes for people living in Saudi Arabia and people living in Yemen. I think we always hear about how the UK stands up for human rights and democracy around the world. In reality, it's arming and supporting some of the most abusive regimes in the world and has done for decades. We always hear about how the UK is a government which has a positive impact on the world, but meanwhile it shows a total disregard for human rights in a lot of these countries, and meanwhile it is complicit in the abuse which is taking place in a lot of these countries. There's a rank hypocrisy at the heart of UK foreign policy, and UK foreign policy in the Middle East in particular, and Saudi Arabia is right at the centre of that.
British Foreign Minister Boris Johnson was questioned about this, and I believe at one point his response was, well, if we don't sell arms to Saudi Arabia, somebody else will. Do you accept that in actual fact it's obviously Saudi Arabia that are the main perpetrators of this, and that Britain's role is merely to supply arms, and indeed somebody else could well be selling the arms if it weren't for Britain?
I think there's two different parts of this. The first part is the argument we hear is by selling weapons the UK can influence how Saudi Arabia uses them and how other countries use them. But the exact opposite is the case. All the power in relationship is with Saudi Arabia. All the power in relationship is with the buyer. There's no evidence whatsoever that all these decades of UK engagement have made the Saudi Arabian government any more moderate or have made the Saudi bombardment of Yemen any more restrained. The other aspect of it is the question about if we didn't sell, someone else would. Now, that's an argument which could be used to justify selling weapons to absolutely anybody in the world. Quite rightly, the UK doesn't arm North Korea, it doesn't arm Iran, it doesn't arm Democratic Republic of Congo, it doesn't arm Russia. And we wouldn't support it arming any of these countries. We want them to treat Saudi Arabia in the same way as they treat these other regimes. We want them to hold Saudi Arabia up to the same standard. Because human rights can't just be something which applies to our adversaries, it's something which has to apply to our allies as well.
While the debate over arms sales rages in the UK, it is the war that is raging in Yemen. The conflict has an alarmingly high rate of civilian casualties and millions of people have been displaced. It's also believed that 1.5 million children are currently malnourished in the country, 370,000 of them severely. On top of this, 178 schools have been attacked, according to the Yemen Post. Yet despite the horrific situation, it is seemingly a war that has failed to penetrate the collective consciousness of the international community. And unless that changes soon, more tragedy may yet befall the country in what has become the world's forgotten conflict.